So this project is something that I wanted to build for a while. It's basically a space frame car, and originally I was going to put a Hayabusa motor in it, and then it kind of evolved out of control and got a WRX motor and ended up in what you see today. So I fully CAD designed all the space frame and all that sort of stuff, and then I made some mock-ups out of tubing. Then got the engine and drivetrain so I could start to CAD up what the rear end of the car would be looking like. I got the space frame base made outside by a professional because I wasn't very good at welding at that point. As it turns out, it would have been better off making it in-house because it turned out my welding was better than his anyway by the end of the process. Basically just going along here, fitting a whole bunch of different components. Trying to get the engine in was actually quite a hard thing to try and get the engine positioned correctly. That took quite a while. The electronics took a long time to go through as well because I was going to try using the stock loom with the stock ECU. I eventually ended up using a Haltech, but I did run the stock ECU for my first race and a few other things at that. To keep the packaging in the cabin very tight, I had to be very careful with where I put the seat belts. So in order to get the angles right, the positions of the strap mounts had to be pretty much perfect for me. This took a lot of fitting up to try and get right. It's funny because you can see my welds get progressively better over the course of this build. They start being, okay, and then they get a lot better by the end. This whole chassis is done out of mild steel with MIG, which I figured would be nice and forgiving, as I was relatively new to welding at the time that I started, and I didn't want to risk heat affected zones and stuff on chromo. All the additional tubing that was added by me was all hand cut on a basic drill notcher that I shoved in my vise. The engine mounts were adapted from the factory engine mounts with the factory gearbox mounts, and urethane bushings were used, including urethane bushings on the rear gearbox mounts. Brake pedal set is a Wilwood kit of pedals hooked up to basically a steel plate. The entire rear section of the car has a subframe that can be pulled off that allows access to the engine, but when it's bolted in, the car stays nice and rigid. To fit up the steering wheel was pretty difficult. I had to suspend it by a whole mess of sort of tie-down straps and bungee cords. The control arms at the front lowers are all box design. As you can see here, they were made from laser cut pieces that I then MIG welded together. And they're of course incredibly strong and light. Then did a bit of dodgy wiring to try and get the engine to start up so I could see if it would crank and run, and that managed to work alright. I got a friend of mine to do the uprights to weld them out of chromo because I wasn't confident with it, and he did a pretty good job there. The bodywork was made out of a foam molding technique that's in one of my other videos if you want to check out more on that. It's 3 main parts on the front, and the rest are all pretty much flat panels. The dash holds all the electronics, and the whole unit is obviously very light. Trying to pass the space frame around the rear engine and drive shafts was also a really difficult task. Same thing on the front control arms, which had to pass around the shocks. We can see here some of the molding for the front nose cone and how I made it out of sections of foam that were hot wire cut between timber templates. Gear shift was pretty good, so I couldn't really resist having a bit of fun with it. It's a cable shift that goes to my own mechanism design on the rear. Here we can see the molding of the nose cone and some weldings on the rear control arms, which are also box design at the front but then tubular design at the rear. Then started to assemble the whole buggy together and get the geometry working so that I could start to get ready to drop it onto the ground. It involved a lot of tabs. This buggy has over 300 tabs in it, which take quite a while to make because I was stubborn and decided to make them by hand instead of going out and getting them laser cut. The frame is all hand painted in black, just because if it cracks it's easy to repair than powder coat, and of course it's a lot cheaper than powder coat. You We can see that as I start to add more and more pieces, the car starts to take a bit more shape. Obviously, like all the stuff you're seeing here that is pretty much custom, apart from a few items like intake pipes, like hubs, stuff like that. The hubs are off the shelf, but the entire upright behind it is fully custom. Custom exhaust, as you can see there. Got the same thread to TIG weld up my aluminium tank with internal baffles and fuel foam. Here you can see basically a time lapse of the assembly to get the car onto the ground, so putting on the control arms front and rear, putting on the suspension, testing the suspension, and lowering the car down. This video was taken from the first time the car ever went on the ground, so I was a little bit scared that it was going to break, but no, it was all perfect. All the calculations obviously worked, and it was really great. Once fitted out with the panels, I then did some testing on drops to see basically how well it worked on that. And then there was some aero analysis and some sort of final assembly little bits and pieces. So all the sensors, we still had to put on the front brake discs and calipers at this point. Surprisingly enough, the first time I plugged it in, it actually all started up, which was pretty cool. So then I started to work on the aerodynamics kit a bit. So we got some deflectors at the front, the roof fins, the rear wing, which is a pretty cool multi-profile construction. You can see some really cool TIG welding here on the front uprights that was done by a friend on the brake mounts. We can see the wings and the aero kit starting to take shape here. It's all hot wire cut. I had pretty successful first testing, and then I took it back and did some more aero work. And after a second bit of testing, I finally strapped everything up properly and sent it off for its CAM certification, which it got easily. Well, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed that diary of my build. If you have been following this build from the start, thanks for your support. If you haven't been following it from the start, perhaps you might want to check out some of the other videos on my channel on it, down the bottom, and some of my other technical videos that may help you if you're embarking on a project like this of your own. Hopefully, I'll see you next time.